Hello, and welcome to the Island Lamb, and this is episode 16. Beautiful Block Island sunrise and summoning up the courage to cut my steek. Okay, so for those of you who have been following me from the beginning, you know all about this, but for all those new viewers, and thank you, I noticed several new subscribers in the last couple of weeks, and I'm so enjoying your comments. So just to catch everyone up, this is the Andrea Mowry Spark Cardigan. I can't say enough about Andrea Mowry's pattern writing. I have made a couple of hers now. I made the stone crop pullover, and I guess maybe two. This is the second one. And this caught my attention. This has been out for quite a while now, and I think she has since also made a men's version that does not have the belt. But just to give you a little overview of some of the details in this. This is a bottom-up construction, and she recommends you start on the sleeve, and I did follow a few podcasters who did the same, and I'm glad I did. It gave you a good feeling of your tension. We actually learned from some test knitters that we should go up a needle size on the sleeves because, you know, as we know, when we work in small circumference, we have a tendency to knit tighter. I know there is a train of thought that says to work inside out when you're working small circumference, but I didn't do that. I didn't even think of it at the time. I just sort of remembered that. So I did start with the sleeves. This has a beautiful long cuff that you roll up, and you right away start into the pattern work. A very simple pattern to follow. And once you clear this little area here, you are really just following a 4-row repeat, and every other row is the main color. So all of this color work is accomplished with a variegated yarn. And Andrea's pattern recommends that you use Magpie, and I'm just checking my notes here to get this right, Magpie Nest for your main color and Spin Cycle Dream State for your variegated color. And this is a worsted weight. Those are worsted weight yarns. I wanted to use my tried and true yarn of Cascade 220. I love that yarn. I've had great luck with that as a worsted weight. I've made Fisherman Knits, I've done Fair Isle, and I had some of this beautiful Atlantic color. So what I needed to do was think about my variegated color work. And I have never steeked before, so I'm just going to mention that now because the choice I made for my variegated color work did not take into account the properties of steeking. So I bought the Cascade 220 Superwash variegated yarn in this beautiful red to gray color, and I just fell in love with it. So you can see it knitted up beautifully. I'll continue with the details of this pattern. So we are bottom up. We started with the sleeves, beautiful shawl collar, raglan sleeves, which I love. So you're picking up those sleeves, and eventually you will have to graft underneath the arm, and it's a Kitchener graft, so it's absolutely seamless. I can't not tell where my grafting is. And a nice cozy belt, and there will be belt loops. Now I've made the belt loops, but I haven't attached them yet because I have not blocked this yet. Once I block it, then I will go ahead and determine where I want the belt loops to go. It calls for 4, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. I may just do 2 in the front and 1 in the middle of the back, a little less fussy. So I've got those ready to go, and this was just an I-cord, a quick little I-cord, 2.5 inches of I-cord for each one. Also on the shawl collar, there's a beautiful I-cord bind off. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous garment. Let's see, is that everything I can tell you about the pattern? The main color is knit on a US 7, a 4.5 millimeter needle. The sleeves, as I mentioned, we went up a size, or I went up a size to a size 8, which is a 5 millimeter. And the ribbing is done, let's see, I said the body is on a 7, a 4.5, the sleeve is on an 8 millimeter, and the ribbing is on a 5, which is a 3.75 millimeter. So you really should do some swatching, especially working on this sleeve, just to get a good gauge. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the biggest detail of this sweater. It is knit in the round. So I'm going to take the belt off so you can see what I mean. This shawl collar goes on afterwards. So you're knitting in the round, and in here, in the middle here, we're steeking stitches. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what steeking is. So steeking is a shortcut in knitted garments if you want to knit in the round and then create a cardigan or an opening for an armhole or maybe a V-neck, wherever you want an opening, but you don't want to have to knit back and forth. So the steek itself is the bridge of the extra stitches. So you're working along, I would have had, it's either like usually 6 to 8 stitches, and they're usually done in rib maybe, or multiple colors, like maybe one row is red, one row is blue in this case, so that you can see where you're eventually going to cut. The technique was developed in the Shetland Islands and primarily for Fair Isle knitting. And you can kind of see why that happened. So when you're knitting in Fair Isle and you're knitting with multiple colors, the last thing you want to do is turn your work and purl. So this allows you to keep going in the round. It's faster. You are not changing, you don't have as many ends to hide. So a lot of good reasons to learn this technique if you like knitting in the round and you want to have a cardigan, or you want to have some openings and you don't like to purl. A lot of good reasons to do it. Some pitfalls that I encountered along the way. Not really understanding the process did not prepare me for the use of superwash yarn. So after I knit this, I started looking at some of the tutorials, and I realized quickly that I had made a mistake choosing a superwash yarn. Because the whole concept of what you're doing here is you're going to cut. You're going to cut through those steeking stitches. And if you're using, let's say, a really good fine Shetland wool, some say you don't even have to reinforce those stitches, that wool is so sticky that it will just stick together, it will hold. And stitches do not want to come apart in this direction, they want to come apart in this direction. So that is helpful to know that. So the other thing you want to do, pitfall you want to avoid, is one, you never want to use well, I'm not going to say never because I've done it. It can be done. But I think you'll have a lot less anguish and worry if you don't use a superwash yarn. The other thing is choose your reinforcement method to suit you. Now in this pattern, Andrea recommends a crochet reinforcement row. And what I mean by that is, so let's say this was the steeking area and you're going to cut up the middle, you would reinforce over on each side of where you're going to cut by running a crochet chain stitch all the way up on both sides. That's one method. Another method is a running stitch, again, on both sides, or run your knitted garment through your sewing machine on a zigzag stitch. So when I heard about all those different methods, I thought maybe I would use my sewing machine, but the more I thought about that, the more nervous that made me, because now you're using thread, and if something goes wrong, you're unpicking thread. And I hadn't used my machine in so long, and my machine's a little clunky, and that just made me nervous to even think about that. Because remember, this is all knitted up. You're trying to move all this fabric through your sewing machine. So I elected to use the crochet method, and I did that on both sides of the steek. And that's right around the time I discovered my mistake by using the superwash. So then I went ahead and I made a swatch using the same method. The superwash, I did the crochet chain, and I cut. And when I started going like this, the superwash just came undone. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I made another swatch, and I did the crochet, and then I did a running stitch on each side. That seemed to hold a little bit better, but I was still nervous about it. So I went ahead and I made up the belt. And then I decided, so what the pattern suggests is that you go ahead and you cut the steek, and then you pick up your stitches and you work this beautiful shawl collar. So I decided while I was, waiting for my courage and procrastinating, to just go ahead and pick up the stitches before I made the cut for the shawl collar. And I just started knitting the shawl collar. And I have some photos I hope I'm showing all along the way to show you some of the close-ups of what I've been talking about. And you'll see that I worked, so what you do is you pick up all the stitches, then you work up here, and then you work to the back. And then by method of using German short rows, you're working back and forth across the back of the collar, because you can see this collar is much wider. I hope you can see that, is much wider than the front panel. So you're working in German short rows across the back, and each time you come down, you pick up, you knit another stitch on further down the sweater, and then you come around and you do the same thing. You grab another stitch and you work back and you grab another stitch, and eventually you have worked up the shawl collar. And when you get to a certain point, and we know where that is because she tells us exactly how many stitches to do with the German short rows, you're now here. And you're just going all the way around and all the way back. And this is all done in garter stitch. So it was a nice way for me to just stop thinking about the steek for a little while and just knit in garter stitch. And then when I came to the end, I realized I was going to have to do this beautiful 3-stitch bind off, and that took me a little while, so I did that. And then it was like, okay, you've made the belt, you've made the belt loops, you've got the shawl collar on. And during this whole time that I had been thinking about the steek, I was also letting my fingers rub up and down the steek stitches and hoping to felt maybe some of the yarn fibers from the 100% wool of the main color with that wool that is mixed in with the superwash of the variegated yarn. And also when I did my crochet reinforcement and my backstitch reinforcement, I used a Angora wool fingering weight, and I was hoping that those fibers would also help felt and maybe fuse a little bit. So there was nothing left to do except for cutting it. And I am now going to turn this over to the video that my husband shot of me cutting this open. And I would say if you want to grab yourself a nice hot cup of tea or coffee or a cocktail, because I did have a cocktail waiting for me after I finished cutting up the steek, and you'll get to see how it went. And I will also tell you that after you see the video and after you steek it, what you're not going to see is I did, per the pattern, a whip stitch. So now you've cut it open, you've got those raw stitches, the reinforcement stitches, and you've got this beautiful shawl collar. So what's going to happen is the steek stitches are going to want to fold inside, as you can see. And so once that was folded inside, I did a running stitch, and I used a fingering navy blue 100% wool yarn, and I caught a stitch in the main fabric, and then I came around and over the steek past my reinforcement stitches and picked up a row from the blue, from the 100%, and just whipped all the way up and around. Not around, all the way up one side and the other, because you don't have steeking stitches back here. You just have them from here to here. And I feel really good about this. I mean, I'm not pushing the envelope here, but I feel like they're secured. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to block this in tepid water, really give it a good soak, and Andrea does recommend it, and she says soak it for at least 15 minutes, because I wouldn't mind getting just a little bit of length. You know, I'll do it to the schematic. I came very close to the dimensions in the schematic, but I will try to get it a little bit longer here. But otherwise, I think the fit is perfect. There's one other thing I'm contemplating doing, and you can see I used white, the color white, for my reinforcement stitches so I could see. And of course, you can't rip those out now because that's part of what's holding this all together. I may, and I did buy some navy blue seam binding tape. I may just stitch some seam binding tape over that, but you can see when it's laying flat, it doesn't open. It's just if I do take it off, I don't know if I'm going to be okay seeing that, and maybe I will. We'll see. You know, my husband likes to remind me that perfectionism is the worst form of self-abuse. So I kind of vacillate between professionalism and perfectionism. So we'll see after I block it, and I'm really looking forward to wearing this. And I thank you for following this process with me. I do recommend, as I mentioned before, any of Andrea Mowry's patterns. They are so well written. They may be several pages. You know, it's not just going to be a one-page sheet of do this, do that. It's going to be her mindset, her thinking of how and why you're doing this. And a lot of great size inclusivity in her patterns. Everything has been test knitted, so you can feel confident that when you sit down to do this, to knit one of her projects, there are not any mistakes. So Now I will turn you over to my steeking of the Spark Cardigan. Thank you for watching. Bye. Okay, this is the day that I'm going to steek my Spark Cardigan, and this Spark Cardigan, it is the Andrea Mowry sweater, and I've talked about this for a couple of months, and I have my nerve up, and I'm going to do it. So I'm using this little board, plastic board, to put underneath so I don't cut through the back of the sweater. And I am looking to see where my steeks are. And if you recall, I did a couple of reinforcements. I did a backstitch reinforcement and a crocheted reinforcement. And for the last few weeks, I've been rubbing these stitches and hoping that they would felt a little bit, because as we all remember, I used superwash for the variegated yarn instead of wool. So here's what we see. We are cutting right up this line, and it starts right now and right here. Here we go. Okay. These are very good sharp scissors, and they are for steeking. And I bought these a long time ago because, believe it or not, I actually took a class on steeking here on Block Island at Northlight Fiber. Okay, now we're getting to the scary part. Now, here's the scary part, because now we're going to encounter the superwash yarn. And we're just going to do it. Oh, God. Just going to keep going. Now, Andrea does suggest that we do a whip stitch afterwards, and you know I'm going to do that, and I'm going to catch this blue 100% wool and do my whip stitch with that, so I'm not tugging against these superwash stitches. And I want you to know my husband is standing by for moral support. He's actually manning the camera.
And the first aid kit.
And the first aid kit is he. And now I'm a little worried because it looks like the stitch. Oh no, I still can see where I'm supposed to be. What am I doing now? I kind of lost my train of where I'm cutting. I'm still cutting up. Am I cutting up that? Yes, I'm cutting up the. Yes, I'm cutting up the middle here. I guess the best thing to do is to not stop so you don't lose your line. Oh. It's really a, I'm going to move this down, honey. Am I still in the frame? It's very nerve-wracking. I will, oof, see, because we're seeing, see that? So see, I'm going to whip stitch this down on the inside. Look at how beautiful. I think the other thing that is going to give me a sense of peace here is that I am going to, after I whip stitch this, I am going to block this. And I'm hoping that, Oh, I'm hoping that blocking will also help fuse the wool stitches. It's scary. Because I'm really seeing the superwash stitches. See, they even look like they're falling apart a little bit. So my lesson learned here is never, ever, ever use superwash yarn if you plan on steeking, so that you don't have to go through this anguish. I'm coming right up to the top now. I've done it. Okay, it's done. We can see what...
And you didn't make a stinking mess.
My husband said I didn't make a stinking... I didn't make a stinking mess. Now, I'm not going to go tugging and pulling at this. I mean, I just think that would be asking for trouble. I think I'm just going to go sit down with my embroidery needle and get this whip stitch on as fast as I can. Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be too bulky. I did watch a couple of podcasts where some podcasters did a, now this side feels both, no, I guess it's the same. A couple of podcasters who did a whip stitch first and then the second time, and they regretted that. So, okay,